Good morning and welcome to ASL's HR in 10.
At 10.
I'm Jason Perry,
And I'm Kimberly Bradshaw.
and every Thursday at 10 a.m. we get together to talk about what's going on in the wonderful world of employment and HR. It's kind of summer holiday season. We usually find you know where I'm going already, don't you? There's no stories in the summer, are there? Everybody goes on holiday and the news stops, doesn't it?
Oh, I think not, with the announcement of all the flight cancellations and air traffic and baggage handler strikes. I don't think
Indeed.
it's going to be a fun summer.
And we come back to it in a minute, but you obviously have personal experience here as well. But
Yes,
I'll
I won't name the airline, but
no, probably
basically,
best.
I checked in for a flight at 4:45 on a Thursday afternoon, and I finally landed at my destination 8:30 p.m. on the Saturday. And on the way coming back, and I only went for a weekend, on the
Did you get there
Sunday.
before you were due to return? Just out of
Only
interest.
just. Uh,
Yes.
and then coming back, I checked in at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, and I landed at 5 p.m. on Wednesday.
Yes, that's a bit of a long weekend. So the bit that interests me here is, I mean, you have the lovely position of being an HR consultant and able to manage your own diary, and I know that brings inconveniences. But if you're an employee and you've taken, okay, I say 2 days off, you probably wouldn't have even taken any leave because it was a weekend away. You might have scheduled a half day Friday for the flight, let's say.
Mm.
Um, but where does this leave employers if suddenly we look like we're going to have a whole range of air traffic control strikes across Europe? We already know we've got staff shortages in both air traffic control, ground handling, airlines, and we're seeing more and more flight cancellations. So, what happens if you're stuck abroad as an employee?
I think it depends whether you're on holiday or you have to go because it's business. If you are there because you have to on business, I don't think the same rules necessarily apply. But if knowing that there's going to be all these issues,
Mm,
if you willfully go on holiday and haven't checked that there's alternative routes back,
mm.
then, the bottom line could be quite harsh, couldn't
Um,
it?
yeah, I suppose I'm going to take that a bit further. It's not even if you willfully do it. Even if you don't know that
Mm.
there's a strike next weekend and you go on a flight, the simple answer is you're not available for work. And is it your employer's responsibility that you simply aren't there? Should
Yeah.
they pay you?
Well, that's it, because technically you're AWOL, absent
Yes,
without leave.
absolutely.
So it, in theory, could be unpaid leave.
Now, obviously, I know who I'm talking to here, and there's this lovely phrase I think popping into your mind already, which is employee engagement.
Yeah,
It's not really the smartest thing, is it, to say to somebody, by the way, you missed 2 days from work because your flight was cancelled. We're deducting 2 days' pay. Tough luck.
yeah.
That's not great for employee engagement, is it?
It's not an, one of the articles that was talking about this said that, it could be a disciplinary as
Mm,
well. So, and that's even more harsh. So
yes.
I think there are positive ways of dealing with it. And, you know, I know we were talking earlier about the volcanic ash thing a decade
Yes.
or so
I
ago.
I
And I,
got caught in that one about 12 years ago, and I flew out to Germany, and there were no flights back.
yeah,
There was no, I mean, it took me about 3 or 4 days to eventually find a hire car and a train to get back from Hamburg.
yeah. And, I know people who were stuck under that, and a whole load of them grouped together and hired a minibus
Mm.
and drove them back. And so I
But
think,
that's all right if you're in Europe or if you're within,
exactly.
you're not going to do that from America, are you? Or
No, what, you can't swim the Atlantic?
hire a yacht. No, but there are some real difficulties here, and it strikes me that it's easy to say yes as a hard line. It's AWOL, disciplinary, and I think there's probably a case for disciplinaries, but the case is probably repeat offenders, isn't it?
Mhm.
And there are people who we know let's say, stretch the lines of credibility and will always have such situations occur to them.
Yeah.
But it's probably smarter to offer somebody time off in lieu and offer to make it up, or offer them to deduct off their holiday. Perhaps even let them borrow a couple of days from next year's holiday and do something like that to work with people, isn't it?
Yeah, and if their job allows, if I was an employee in that situation, I'd take work with me,
Mm.
my laptop or,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever, so that if the worst happened, I could still function
Yes. Yeah.
normally.
And you may
So,
be able to do some of it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But it's a difficult problem. But for the worker, be prepared. If you start doing this and thinking, woohoo, free holiday, extra days, it doesn't work like that.
no.
And,
And your employer will check whether your flight came or not.
yes, don't make it up as well is a very serious point.
Yeah, it
But
has been known.
yes, yes. But there are issues there that we as employers right now ought to be looking a little bit more at as we're in this strike culture. And the reality is that the same can happen, you know, motorway closures, people can be delayed on their travels even if they're holidaying in England. But the
Mm,
flights thing just takes it up a notch this year,
it
doesn't it?
does, yeah.
Yeah. While we're talking about strikes,
I know where you're going.
yeah, you know I love legal rulings and such like things, and I probably should have been a lawyer is the answer. But um, there's a really interesting one, isn't there? We talked, God, it's not that long ago that we talked about the government plans to allow agency rulers to break strikes.
Mm,
And I think I said then I don't think it will ever work.
mm.
It's too controversial, but there's been a High Court ruling, hasn't there?
There has, yes. 11 of the unions ganged together, brought a legal case, and now the use of agency workers during a strike has been deemed unlawful.
Yes. And I don't know quite where this one's going to go. I'm not sure the government are, shall we say, in a good place to be revisiting such legislation now. I don't think they have the time on their side, and I think their numbers are dwindling and their public support is, I'm not sure dwindling is the right word anymore, but there are plenty of problems with trying to revisit something like this. So my guess is it's just going to fall by the wayside.
Yes, unless, obviously there could be potentially a lot of unconscious bias going on against from the government towards any of the unions on strike and making them think, right, we'll do something about it. Um,
Yes,
you
but they
know,
have to have the numbers and the time to bring in legislation.
yeah,
And we were only hearing yesterday things about education and not having time to bring in legislation there. So I don't see how they have time to revisit this, other than perhaps a challenge in the High Court, an appeal case. I think for the moment, it's probably wise to look at it and say agency workers to break strikes quite simply is not going to work.
yeah.
Which, lo and behold, some of us in HR might have said some months ago.
Yes, indeed. But, if you were thinking of doing it, don't do it, I think. And also, there's, what this brings to mind is alternative ways of dispute resolution.
Mm,
Um, how can you use employee engagement positively
yeah.
um, to renegotiate? I've had to
Yes.
deal with people like Unite and what have
Mm,
you past, and we took some really unusual, different approaches
mm,
in a situation where we could. But yeah, I think you can definitely look at dispute resolution.
yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonably widely known to anyone who has any interaction with me. I'm not a huge fan of striking in any way. Um, uh, I, I see it as too confrontational by the unions at a point when what you want to do is find a way of dialing down the dispute, not dialing it up.
Yeah.
But I think this approach was, a response of dialing it up and going in a really heavy-handed approach. But my objection to it was purely on a practical point. I just don't think it will work because I don't think you'll find the people who want to do that when we are in something fairly close to full employment. as we still appear to be at, despite being right on the verge of a recession.
Yeah.
So,
and despite people, well, and because people are still finding it difficult to fill roles because there aren't
indeed,
people looking.
this leaves me thinking it's all going down the pan.
Oh, that's a nice link, Jason.
Any last stories you want to talk about?
Yes, and in third, we'll be talking about number twos.
You had
Yes,
to go there, didn't you? You had
I'm
to go there.
sorry. I'm
So,
sorry. Yes, go on.
quickly wrapped up in a few moments because HR in 10 is pretty much out of time, but really interesting tribunal, I thought. And the short version is we know employers have a legal obligation to provide basic facilities to an employee, and yet, broadly speaking, on health and safety grounds. And these include things like access to water and access to toilet facilities. And this was a really interesting case. The size of the ruling is what shocked me, where a young apprentice didn't have access to a toilet because it kept blocking.
And why they didn't just get it dealt with is beyond me.
Indeed.
The ruling was £32,000 fine for the employer, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And the individual, he was dismissed for having reported it to the council. And there are whistleblowing laws in place, so he's
Indeed.
protected.
Yes.
But all
So,
for the sake of getting an emergency plumber out.
a very expensive plumber, I think, is the answer. Kimberly, we are out of time, but we did manage to sneak that one in there, as I know you wanted to. I think if I'm right, you're escaping for a couple of weeks, so I think we're going to take a break from HR in 10 for a couple of weeks, but we shall be back in early August.
We will indeed. That's assuming I even get away or make it back.
Assuming your flight returns you safely. Thank